We will start with our panel, Ethical AI, Responsible and Legal Metaverse Design. The first person talking is Anastasia, Nefeli, Vidaki. Please, Anastasia, go ahead.
Hi everyone, on my side as well. Thank you, Aurelio. I'm really glad to be among you today, and I would like to extend my gratitude to all the organizing committee.
15 minutes.
I know. For this event. And without further ado, let me introduce briefly myself. I am a PhD researcher at Cyber and Data Security Lab, which is part of the Faculty of Law and Criminology at Vrije Universiteit Brussels. And today I'm going to present to you briefly the Metaverse as an AI-powered society of control and focus on the ethical concerns on autonomy, self-determination, and surveillance. So before, let's say, get to the substance of this presentation, I would allow myself to talk to you about two disclaimers that I have. The first one is one already discussed. I'm going to approach Metaverse as a potentiality, as a concept, not as a static, let's say, phenomenon. And the second one is that my perspective will be, as a legal scholar, a more normative one, so I ask you to bear with it. And without further ado, let me begin by setting, first of all, the theoretical foundation for my analysis. As some of you might know, or to the knowledge of the rest of you, in 1990, meaning 35 years ago, Gilles Deleuze published a very short but quite of prophetic essay that is entitled Postscript on Societies of Control. In it, he presents us the societies of control, and in order to do that, firstly, he talks about the societies of sovereign, then goes on with societies of discipline, in order to end to the novel concept that he introduces, meaning societies of control. However, due to the short time that we have, I will just let you know that he expands the notion that was already introduced by Michel Foucault, disciplinary societies, and presents actually a new form of power, societies of control. Whereas in disciplinary societies, individuals are governed through institutions, meaning through enclosed ecosystems like schools, like prisons, or like hospitals. In societies of control, we see that behavior is regulated through continuous modulation, which allows for a perpetual adjustment rather than a static confinement. Importantly, control in these societies no longer requires enclosure as in the previous ones, since it is dispersed, it is flexible, and it is ambient, operating through digital codes, through access permissions, and through algorithmic governance. These societies are parallelized by Deleuze with snakes, which are flexible and which at the same time can really change according to the change of their surroundings. At this point, what I asked myself, but what I also ask of you, is what if Metaverse, let's say, or in general, all these spaces of virtual reality can represent the next frontier of this evolution. A domain in which control is no longer institutional or environmental, but it is embedded into the very same architecture of the digital existence itself. In this talk, I will argue, or I will try also to prove to myself, that the metaverse or all these spaces of virtual reality can represent a hyper-advanced notion of society of control, a society that doesn't overly limit action, but that somehow indirectly shapes action by tracking, nudging, or incentivizing behaviors through AI-powered systems without even appearing to be coercive. So let's begin with the control mechanism itself. In this slide, I chose to present to you briefly the control pathway that we can spot in all these virtual spaces. In those, like in the Metaverse one, users are given what appears to be as a freedom in order to navigate rich, immersive, and fully packed virtual environments. But I have to say that this freedom can sometimes be really deceptive because beneath the surface, algorithms are there, and what they can do with assistance of AI, of course, is to continuously track the move, the clicks, the gestures, or even biometric signals that the users produce. Accompanying them, AI-driven recommendation systems can personalize the virtual experience, not to enhance autonomy, as some might argue, but in the worst-case scenario, to maximize engagement and therefore profit. Along with it, there are some gamified incentives like badges, like rewards, or like upgrades that are used in order to guide behavior in those, let's say, platform-defined directions. The algorithmic modulation at its most sophisticated manner is influencing how power is exercised. And in this case, we can argue that power is exercised not simply by saying no, but by making certain paths seem more appealing comparing to the others, which are fading into irrelevance. In this landscape, users do not simply make choices as they might think. Their options are somehow pre-curated, like already weighted and ranked by some computational forces that they are not able most of the times to comprehend and in the majority of the case to foresee. So what results, in my opinion, is not actually user empowerment, but we can talk about the loss of agency. It's a kind of illusion of freedom, we can say, where users believe that they act in an autonomous way, but they are in fact guided by commercial, algorithmic, or you can name even other types of interests. I think that this pathway leads us directly to identity. It has been an issue that has already been discussed. However, I will focus on the Deleuzian perspective on it. So, as we already saw and talked about, identity is not something fixed within the virtual spaces. It's not something singular, and we can say that in most cases it's not even something entirely human. Instead, we can see that users adopt multiple avatars, each tailored to a particular interaction or to a particular platform, and these identities can also be co-shaped by AI profiling, by real-time data collection, and continuous behavioral feedback loops. So rather than being self-constructed, these identities are increasingly algorithmically produced, influenced by database assumptions about user preferences, history, and engagement patterns. So this phenomenon gives, I think, flesh and bones to what Deleuze has called the concept of the individual. In Control Society, Deleuze explains that individuals are no longer themselves, they're no longer whole subjects. They turn into fragmented data points, sliced into patterns, and sold for predictive insights. Moreover, personalization doesn't necessarily mean that the users are empowered. The experience of tailoring an avatar or a profile may be expressive at some point, but in reality, or most of the times, users can be nudged towards some profiles that appear to be more commercially profited than others. So those roles, I think, aim to maximize attention and consumption rather than enable the authentic self-expression of the user. This might lead to naming Metaverse or all these spaces as an environment of algorithmic determinism, where users are scripted into specific modes of being. They're not freely and autonomously chosen by them, but they're leading towards them by some of the choices, whether they are really their own conscious choices or subconscious ones. In this case, I think the ethical concerns are kind of profound and have already been discussed. What happens to autonomy, what happens to authenticity and to self-ownership when an identity is something that is no longer crafted by us, but it is crafted by us, for us? And how does this shape our online presence, but not only our online presence, but also our real-life decisions, our relationships, or our even our work or our ideological and political stance? Last but not least, I think since we are talking about surveillance studies, it is really essential to show how these virtual spaces can turn into a surveillance apparatus. In this kind of environment, surveillance is not something that can easily be seen or touched. It is not a camera that is in front of us. It is not a policeman that is observing every action that we make. It is something more intangible, something intimate, and as some scholars have already described it, something that can be also participatory. I think that surveillance, when we're talking about metaverse, goes beyond the panopticon that was discussed by Bentham. There is no need in our case for visible watchtowers, for windows, because we end up voluntarily sharing our movements, our preferences, and even our biometrical signals. In this case, AI-supported behavioral profiling allows platforms to monitor what we users do, but also what we might do, which gives birth to a new kind of predictive surveillance, a model that anticipates, on the one hand, action, but at the same time that it can adjust the environment accordingly. So in this environment, users are no longer controlled via restrictions, but via gamification, through incentives, through points, or through various kinds of rewards that tend to encourage conformity and compliance without the need for external enforcement. Importantly, this control is often experienced as voluntarily, meaning that users tend to self-regulate because the system is somehow designed to make the self-compliance feeling rewarding. This is what Deleuze somehow mentioned, but further scholars later introduced as this novel kind of participatory surveillance. But I have to mention for the legal scholars that participation doesn't mean necessarily consent. It means complicity with systems users do not completely understand or do not understand at all. So in many cases, as this one, control is enforced through automated governance, through smart contracts, through algorithmic moderation, or through predictive flagging, all without or with minimum human oversight and therefore accountability. This raises, of course, concerns about bias, about transparency, and about the democratic legitimacy, we would say, or generally the democratic nature of this decision-making. In this case, I chose to paraphrase the lines of flight, which the Deleuzian theory uses, as the lines of fight. So are there any methods that we can use to resist the phenomenon? I have to say at this point that in his essay, which was written quite many years ago, Deleuze does not have to offer really firm suggestions or solutions. Instead, he proposes this idea, the lines of light, alternative pathways that subvert, evade, or at least minimize control. So in the context of Metaverse, I was trying to come up with some suggestions, and those might include hacking or the critical engagement or disengagement with these platforms, or even in some cases counter-programming and collective sabotage. But then it came to my mind that there is always a catch with those proposals. And the catch is that those ecosystems and those control societies, as Deleuze names them, can be really adaptive, which means that they can somehow absorb resistance, and even subversion can be recoded, can be monetized, and can be deployed afterwards as a novel kind of engagement or of re-engagement. And this is the real power of control systems. It's their capacity to simulate freedom and to give the notion that people and users are acting in a free manner, while at the same time they are not, because those systems continue to retain power over the architecture within which users make their own choices. So in my opinion at least, and I would really love to hear yours, true resistance can come through one possible way, through redefining agency within it, through building ecosystems that are transparent, that can be uncountable, and that support collective guidance and collective governance instead of single users trying to, struggling to find their own way through virtual reality spaces. At this point, I would like to make some remarks and some brief conclusions. We know that the metaverse and all these spaces are not simply some virtual playgrounds. They can be a political space, they can be a tool of governance, and they can possibly create a new model, a new way of being. In these infrastructures, control is embedded in ways that are subtle, that are pervasive, and for most of the times are difficult to detect and to resist. Not only data is commodified, but also identity itself can be commodified, and this gives birth to an act of surveillance where the user is both the subject and the instrument of control. So understanding these dynamics through Deleuze's theory of control societies is crucial, not just on an academic or on a philosophical basis, but also on a legal, academic, on a legal ethic, and also even political one. I think that only by engaging critically with the architectures, with the new digital networks, and the new aspects of this digital life, we can begin at least to imagine futures where autonomy, self-determination, and freedom are actually at place and actually exist, and are not purely something that we talk about on an academic basis. And without further ado, and with this, I hope, positive note, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion or to questions that might come up. Thank you.
I will give the floor to the following speakers, and then we can have a discussion or questions at the end. Okay, so I ask Anselm Küsters to take the floor.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be back in Alicante for the second iteration of this conference. And as you can see from the title of my presentation, I will talk about the intersection of AI agents and the metaverse. And I will do so in 3 parts. I will first briefly define what I mean with AI agents, and then give some concrete examples of how we can see already today how these agents might play a role in the future metaverse. I will then talk in the second section about the risks this move might entail, ranging from economic and social risks to psychological, political, and to legal risks. And then in the third section, because I don't want to use all of my time just to critique technology, I also want to emphasize how we might mediate these risks and offer some policy solutions. So what do I mean with AI agents? If you look in the literature, there's not one joint consensus definition about this. And if I listened carefully today, there were also some different ways of using this term in previous presentations and panels. For instance, related to the fact if this is something embodied or not. For the sake of this presentation, I will focus on 4 key characteristics. First, AI that can autonomously operate in the sense that there's no step-by-step instructions, no rule-based mechanism. Secondly, that there's some sort of goal-oriented behavior because there's an objective function behind, that the agent thirdly can exercise some sort of planning, so it tries to anticipate outcomes and behavior of humans or other AI agents. And then finally, that there's some direct impact in this consequentialist perspective that we had right at the beginning of this conference. In a nutshell, this is just to say that I don't mean simple automation in the sense of earlier rule-based systems. So this is beyond just recalling something predefined or just some sort of avatar personalization. These are systems driven by large language models, as we have just seen in the previous keynotes. So they are capable of independent decision-making in some complex settings. And if you adopt this kind of definitions, there are already many agents out there today driven by LLMs. In the most recent survey I found by Kasper et al., which is called the AI Agent Index, they find 67 systems globally, and I'm sure nowadays there are already more because this is a couple of months old. Importantly, most of these systems are created by large companies in the United States, so there are some strong economic incentives behind them. And this is important because it means that often there are no public safety policies, and not all of these systems have run through comprehensive safety evaluation. In fact, only a minority has. And this is important if we think about the risks that these systems might bring with them. And this is why I focus on risk in the second part of my presentation. However, before doing so, I just want to give some examples of why these agents might be important for populating the metaverse. Of course, you have already a couple of startups and companies in the sector, Character.ai, Inward AI. So commercial implementations of large language models, for instance, for building so-called NPCs, non-playable characters that have some personality, some knowledge bases that they can use to interact with humans in games. But what I find even more interesting for this presentation is that we have a lot of research about testing LLMs in gaming environments. This started with very simple games like tic-tac-toe or poker, or early versions of LLMs like GPT-2 that were used in the adventure game Throg. But nowadays there are even more complex games. For instance, this factory learning environment, which is plotted here on the slide, it's a simulation game that is being used to test LLMs. And there are even benchmarks like Game Arena that really are used to test frontier LLMs. As you probably know, whenever there's a new LLM being published, there's this benchmark game that you have to beat the previous benchmarks of previous models. And you can do this also by checking how good these models are in performing games. 3 concrete examples that are often referenced as breakthroughs in this field. The first one is Voyager. This is a system that is used to play Minecraft. This is based on GPT-4. And as the researchers could show, this model is quite able to autonomously play many dimensions of Minecraft through an API. And there are different kind of tasks that you can do in Minecraft, as shown here on the slide, that GPT-4 is already able of doing. A further iteration of this, developed by DeepMind, is called Dreamer. Here the system was even able to achieve so-called diamond collection. That's a particularly complex task where you have to conduct a lot of interdependent steps. And interestingly, this was based only on reinforcement learning. We have already heard about that in the previous keynote. So it was not necessary to record humans playing the games. This was just based on trial and error. And then the final example I wanted to show, because I think it comes closest to what is necessary for populating a future metaverse, is Claude 3.7 Sonnet that has been used to play the Pokemon game. As you might know, Pokemon involves many levels. You have to walk around, talk with other characters, and it involves a lot of tasks that are quite complex. And as you can see here on the slide, previous iterations of the Claude large language model has been getting better in playing this Pokemon game. It has advanced to more further out levels. So if you look at this research here by Anthropic, you get the sense that there might be a future where we have AI agents populating autonomously the metaverse and interacting with humans and other AI agents without predefined programming. To come to my interim conclusion for this first part, I think it's fair to say that we have preliminary evidence of how AI agents powered by LLMs or by neural reasoning models could realistically inhabit the future metaverse. However, if we look into the underlying research papers published by these firms, you also see that they still struggle in many settings. So they can only complete a minority of structured tasks yet. In particular, there are problems with spatial reasoning, with own debugging. And for many tasks, there's only a success rate of about a third. Still, what is also becoming clear is that the models are getting better at this. So we have to ask what kind of risks are these models bringing with them if we put them into virtual worlds and not just games. And this is the second section. I want to start with economic risks. One risk that is often cited by economists is called algorithmic collusion. This is still from the previous older days of classic machine learning, so not just LLMs, but I think it's a risk that is becoming more prevalent with LLMs. Here the idea is that if AI agents share the same algorithms or the same training data, they may unintentionally coordinate, especially if they interact with each other over a longer time frame. This might result in price fixing, in restricted competition, in market manipulation. Think about one firm employing an AI agent to buy paper because they need it for their office, and another firm having also an agent trying to sell paper. So if they interact over a longer time frame, they might find out that it's beneficial to collude. In the metaverse context, this might mean something like digital asset pricing that is coordinated, or manipulation of in-game economies that are often very important in these virtual worlds. And I think here the key factor will be the protocols that will define how agents interoperate. We have some protocols that define how agents interact with websites, with other elements in virtual worlds, but there are also protocols that define how agents interact with each other. And it will be key that these protocols are open and transparent and not monopolized. Another economic risk is that these AI agents might not be neutral, that they might kind of sell certain brands or products in a hidden way, something like premium product placements. There have been leaks about OpenAI, how they try to sell space in their ChatGPT interface. We also see that they experiment with product carousels. And more generally, you could say that there might be some hidden commercial incentives for why AI agents recommend maybe one product and not another. And this is a particular problem because there are interface constraints. So when you do a Google search, you get 10 hyperlinks, and you can have a little bit of search on your own. But if you interact with an agent over voice or in a chat, there's usually only space for getting 1 or 2 recommendations. And this might disadvantage smaller creators, smaller companies in virtual worlds, and undermine fair competition. There are also social risks. There are already a couple of experiments being conducted quite close to this therapy context we saw earlier, where people had to rate how they liked the responses given by LLMs or by humans to their problems, and often they rated that the AI is more empathetic and gives more high-quality recommendations. And interestingly, they still say that even when they are told that they're interacting with an AI system and not with a human. So this creates some risks of emotional manipulation in virtual worlds. And it's particularly concerning because avatars become more realistic, as Emmy Hein has shown in a recent article. There are also political risks. This is simply because these LLMs are not neutral. They reflect the biases in their training data. There's a lot of research on that, how these models range on the left-right spectrum or on the spectrum from authoritarian to libertarian. Again, translated to a metaverse, this might mean that virtual agents might have certain political recommendations or frame certain narratives, reinforce worldviews, and this might lead to, in the long term, information ecosystem manipulation or to the shaping of personal values of people in the metaverse without explicit consent by the people entering these virtual worlds. And then a final risk I want to outline are legal risks. We know that many platforms already today exercise state-like authority in the sense that they give a lot of dispute resolution that they conduct dispute resolution in their platforms, as shown in this book, Cloud Empires. And in the future, they might use AI for these tasks. So if people in virtual worlds have certain problems, that a product that they bought is not as they hoped it would be like, or they have problems with another user, in the future this might be outsourced to AI agents. And there's some preliminary research also in this field that shows that LLM systems embedded in these contexts are very conservative and that they often fail in their legal reasoning. So if we use AI agents as virtual judges or mediators, this might also lead to a lot of risks. So researchers like O'Keefe have argued that we should design LLMs from the beginning so that they have to comply with legal requirements, such as constitutional and criminal law, but I think this is not really leading to 100% security, because in the end these systems are not deterministic. To sum up the second section, I think the key problem is here that we scale these models and they improve their accuracy. This is what we mean with scaling loss, but what we do not scale is honesty in a human sense. So I don't want to talk about that the models cheat, because this is an anthropomorphism. We can talk about specification gaming, meaning that these models will often circumvent rules that we humans take for granted, like legal rules or economic rules. And in the long run, this might undermine any economy we want to set up in virtual worlds, like the metaverse. So what are the implications? Of course, we need some form of guidelines, regulation. In the EU, we have a lot of different elements so far. We have the Web 4.0 and Metaverse strategy. We have the Virtual World Toolbox and the AI Act. I won't go into details here because the next presentation will talk about that. So just to conclude that, in my opinion, what we have so far is not sufficient, although the AI Act is covering AI agents. So I'm arguing here at the end that we have to reconsider this legal framework. We might have to take back the withdrawn AI liability directive. I think that would be very helpful for restoring trust in virtual settings. We need more guidance for how the AI Act relates to agentic AI, and we have to design the future Digital Fairness Act that is currently in the making so that it includes provisions for AI-mediated commerce. We also need more research in this field, like political balance standards, honesty metrics, and benchmarks. And we have to log whenever there are agent decisions in metaverse settings. So to sum up, the main argument of my paper is as follows. We have these new AI agents driven by LLMs. This is really nice. We can use them to populate virtual worlds, but they bring with them certain risks, economic, social, political, and legal ones. And to counter them, we cannot just hope that technology in itself will advance, because trustworthiness is not something that can be scaled. If we look in the physical world, whenever we want to have a functioning market economy, we need some regulatory oversight and intermediaries, and probably we need something similar also for virtual worlds that include economic elements, something like third-party entities, because without trust, in the long term, any digital economy will be undermined. And therefore, I think we have to update the EU Metaverse strategy to take this into account. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anselm. And now the third presentation from the Koninck.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Anselm, to give me indeed the opportunity to tackle the topic of the EU policies and so on. So I am Tom de Koninck. I'm a consultant at TNO, that's a Dutch applied research organization. I must say, up to now, I saw some very good presentations already, and I hope at the end of the day, or almost, I hope to give you a likewise high-quality presentation. What I'm going to give you is some brief information about the outcome document of the high-level conference on the governance of Web 4.0 in virtual worlds. This high-level conference was organized by the European Commission about 2 months ago. And that conference had two objectives. First of all, to look and assess the technologies that will bring the internet towards Web 4.0 and virtual worlds. And just wait a moment, I will give also an explanation what we mean with Web 4.0. So this conference was prepared by the European Commission together with PPMI, a consultancy firm out of Lithuania, and TNO. Basically by, first of all, bringing in an input document to the conference and a background document more explaining all the technologies that will indeed be involved. Second aim was, of course, in the conference itself, to have a broad discussion on the governance itself with as many stakeholders as possible. I think I should give you, yeah, sorry, should have given you the next slide, of course. And of course, both things, input, background on one hand, the discussion on the other hand, this is what led to the outcome document. The outcome document is recently published on the website of the European Commission, and the summary of this outcome document can also be found already in the proceedings of this conference as a separate paper with a more condensed input. What is finally that outcome document? What is that? This is a guidance document for the European Commission and its member states for the upcoming very important WSIS Plus 20 conference. That is the second review of the World Summit of Information Society. The first session 20 years ago led to the globally accepted governance model of multi-stakeholder governance. So it is a second review, and of course, European Commission and member states, they want to know indeed, okay, what are the positions, what are the main topics indeed to stress upon, and what are also the new upcoming risks. And of course, we heard some of them already in this panel and in previous panels also. Just to show you the conference, and we also had someone from the university here. Javier Lopez was also present there. It was in the big plenary room of the European Commission in Brussels. About, yeah, I think 300, 400 people in the room itself, and then likewise the number also online. So a lot of stakeholders present, specifically, of course, mainly, of course, from Europe, but also from Africa, South America, Japan, South Korea. Unfortunately, not from sometimes opposing views like stakeholders from China. They were not present. When we talk about, now I want to talk about the terminology Web 4.0, because Web 4.0 was chosen specifically also in this paper to give a broad view on what we're talking about. And it's a bit a term where we had a lot of discussions of, especially also when talking to standardization bodies like IETF and so on. They said, yeah, but Web 4.0 doesn't exist. And exactly comparing to standardization in mobile networks, where you have 3G, 4G, 5G networks, that's clearly defined by 3GPP. The internet and web is continuously evolving and developing without clear generation gaps. And however, we wanted indeed already to define a new kind of internet where disruptive technologies like AI, like quantum, like virtual worlds, of course, is being used, and it's being used to blend physical and virtual worlds together for the user to have immersive experiences and to have all the new kinds of applications that we see upcoming and that we can see in the future. In the paper also, we stretched the definition of web, also including the internet, the underlying network infrastructure. So you could say, yeah, this is a lot. Yeah, it is also because the conference was not so much a standardization meeting. It was really a conference on the governance of the future internet and all the upcoming technologies that are coming in. That's it. Let's look at the outcome paper itself. And the outcome paper is structured in several parts. First of all, we look at principles, which are the foundations. And we can define two different kinds of principles: policy principles, which define the foundational values, and technical principles, which are supporting these policy principles really to enable the foundations. Both sets of principles then led to recommendations, and these recommendations are the ones that are typically then taken up by the European Commission as when going to WSIS to indeed look at, okay, what should we exactly do? Personally, and also some other people also said, yeah, when looking at policy principles and technical principles, there isn't really something really new written down. And of course, this is also a very political document. This is a document where a lot of consensus, political consensus, is brought in. It's not only a technical document, it's not only it's not so much an academic document, but it's very much a document around the political implications, the risks and so on, and how governance should evolve. Let's now look at the principles itself, and first start with the policy principles. And I know we don't have that much time, so I only will briefly touch on each policy principle and technical principles, because we have 6 of each of them. And the first one is about upholding human rights and ethics in Web 4.0. And we talked about ethics already today quite a lot, but we see a lot of risks coming in also by hyper-personalization. I think Anastasia touched upon that also. We see also biometric tracking. There's much more personal data involved now also, and how does indeed the policies needs to take that into account. Second policy principle, very important, multi-stakeholder model is always been a success when we look at the 20 years from the first WSIS conference up to now. Multi-stakeholder approach has been working, but needs to be strengthened. Needs to be strengthened, also involving more stakeholders and strengthening indeed also stakeholders that are underrepresented, for instance, from the Global South. And looking at ways how indeed also the strong and big corporations, their power in standardization and governance can be a bit mitigated maybe. Third policy principle, cybersecurity and resilience. And looking from a policy point of view, we also see indeed issues from cyber attacks and data exploitation. But of course, this is an issue much more coming back in the technical principles. Privacy and data protection. Europe has been strong in that. GDPR is, I think, and we've seen that, is almost a reference in the world on how data protection can be done. But it is clear that with new technologies coming in, it needs to be strengthened, it needs to be re-evaluated, and it also needs to be globalized. Fifth policy principle about the accessibility and bridging digital divides. I've talked already, okay, it's very difficult in a multi-stakeholder approach for governance to get the global south involved. It's then the stakeholders, but we also see the users that there's still an issue. Hardware is becoming more expensive. When we look at AI, I mean, Gen AI is everywhere, but it's getting more and more expensive when you want to use it really as in a professional way. And lastly, as a policy principle, fair competition and interoperability. And that is, of course, when we look at the Big Five and how they are dividing the world, not only virtual worlds, but also everything that is search, everything that is AI. It's almost divided between them. We need to have also something that can break this market concentration, and that can be through interoperability and so on. Let's move to the technical principles, and some of those principles take back the policy principles, but now from a technical point of view. And the first one is about the open and interoperable internet. And as said in the last policy principle, this is a way indeed to overcome the market concentration by the Big Five when we have interoperability, when we have standards, how we can interconnect, for instance, how to interconnect virtual worlds. How can I move from one virtual world to another? It doesn't exist yet, but this can overcome indeed that market concentration. Second technical principle is a very clear one, and it is the one talking about the core standards and the core protocols that built the internet, TCP being one of them, and really to extend and to strengthen the use of it also moving forward. And of course, there's a lot of new applications coming on when looking at the web, but the underlying internet is still relying heavily on TCP/IP. Next technical principle is then development of global and inclusive standards. And again, here also looking at the standardization bodies that exist today. They are really prepared to move forward for the future internet. And they look indeed at how to solve problems and mitigate risks that are approaching. That not exist yet, but that they see approaching. So a proactive approach also to those risks and those problems through standardization. And then the next two technical principles look at user protection. One is about accountability and transparency. When users are using applications, when they are getting into virtual worlds, they want trustworthiness. When they see, for instance, an AI-based avatar, okay, they want to know that it's an AI-based avatar and not instead of a real person. So trustworthiness is important also in there. And that is to protect indeed how you as a user will behave. So that's important. Second technical principle on user protection is then again about privacy and security. It's to secure your data. It's to ensure also, and what we saw this morning, to ensure also protection against harm, and that of course that of course is essential. And the last one, last but not least, of course, sustainability. There's already a lot of debate, Gen AI, using so much power, so much water consumption also. Can we just let innovation loose and forget indeed sustainability? And sustainability should be already in the design of new applications and new technologies. This was very quickly policy principles and technical principles. Of course, there's more explanation in the outcome document itself. I want to go quickly through the 4 recommendations. Very quickly, the first recommendation is about developing the guidance document. The second recommendation is about, again, the multi-stakeholder involvement for standardization. The third one is about proactive risk assessment. And the last one, to facilitate the policy governance, and maybe we can also call it regulation between the governments. And I'm skipping through it a bit quickly because I wanted, out of the conference itself, what were there the 2 main discussion points and what were where we had clearly opposing views. First of all, it was about splinter nets. Splinter nets is where parts of the internet are separated from the global internet. And the main view is, of course, that should be avoided. In the internet from its conception on was a global network accessible by all. On the other hand, we see now a new geopolitical situation where Europe is also asking for sovereignty and autonomy. And so this is, from a governance point of view, quite a difficult thing to do, that you want on one hand to avoid that other nations can impact your internet. That is now really where you are relying on also for a lot of critical systems and critical platforms. The second one was exactly about, do we have to do proactive based regulation, proactive risk-based regulation? Because, of course, innovation is something where you try and you want to move forward. But if immediately you have an AI Act, you have GDPR, that is hindering innovation. We see that quite some AI applications are not available in Europe just because Europe is regulating too much according to those companies. And that was clearly also a debate, should we indeed also give more room to innovation? And there are solutions, and solutions like regulatory sandboxes, where first of all that innovation can be tested out. However, and I had a discussion with Aurelio, it is a concept that is well known, but it is not a concept that is well tested. And so it is really something where governance is should be also be proven that it can work and so on. So basically, that was a very quick run through the content of the outcome document, and I invite you to read it through if you think it's interesting for you, and otherwise you can always come to me for more questions and so on. Thank you.
Very good. I would like to be in time, so we have 5 minutes for questions. Anyone would like to ask something to Gianmarco? You need them. Ah, yeah.
I want to stir the pot. Stir the pot.
Hi. So I want to first of all ask the first two presenters a question. Apparently on the surface level, one of you was saying there is too much control in the metaverse, at least in the concept of the metaverse. You have surveillance, you have capitalistic interests, and there is too much control over the individual. And the second talk on the surface was saying there is not enough control. There are all these bots that go about and we don't know what they will do. Maybe they will collude and fool us and manipulate it. So not enough control. So I don't know. I think it seems that there is a contradiction. I have a feeling that if you clarify a little bit what you mean by control, we will realize that there isn't a contradiction. But maybe a few words on your view of control and what it means. Thank you.
Could I just ask a follow-up to that? Because it's almost the same question.
Yes. So we will...
So very much related to that, I was wondering if you could kind of comment on the tensions between these principles or aims or goals of these governance mechanisms. Because you talked about surveillance, and that's all about knowing what's going on, but then you're talking about impingement of rights, such as privacy and so on. You need, I think explicitly said, well, we need to log more. But if you log more, that's capturing more information about people and what they're doing. So you kind of have an intrinsic tension there. I mean, another thing is by putting all these standards and requirements in place, that's a good thing from one side. On the other side, people argue that can help reinforce particular power structures because the only people that can actually comply with these tend to be the bigger platforms and so on. So it's very much a similar question to this, you know, what are the tensions in this space and how do you see these things playing out?
I think we should listen to Gianmarco as well, and we can answer all the questions together.
Thank you. My question is for Tom, and it's really a quick one. So who are basically, if there's any specific recipients of the governance for Web 4.0, namely user-generated content like in Web 4.0, can it have an actual, can providers, let's call them that way, have an actual accountability for that, given that they're basically depowered in a Web 4.0? So who are the recipients? That's my question. But that's because I don't know the answer, so it's an actual question, and maybe I didn't get it. Yeah, no, because, you know, in terms that it's okay.
Okay, we will start with Anastasia, Anselm, and finally Tom.
Yep.
The same orders.
Okay, thank you for the question and actually the opportunity to be able to clarify a little bit what is meant under control, not in my opinion, but using Deleuze's vision, let's say. According to him, control is something that is embedded within society that on the one hand is actually structuring society, so it is a kind of societal contributing to societal organization, but at the same time, it is also a form of governing the society. So it can be an aspect of societal governance as well. And I tried to approach it through the scope of surveillance studies. So control, that is seen as an external, let's say, factor, but it is then perceived by the individual, in this case by the user of the virtual space, and is afterwards internalized and used for the various, let's say, purposes that were explained during the discussion that we had. So I do not see that we contradict a lot, because I believe that control, in my case at least, is perceived more in an ethical and in a philosophical and in an individual way, and not actually something that is imposed externally, legally, or politically.
Yeah, I try to complement that. So on a superficial level, the easy answer would be to say, you talked about control of humans and I talked about control of AI agents. So that would be the easy solution, but I think it's a bit more complicated. I agree there is maybe a little clash, and that's if we want to control AI agents, I think we have to go at the end beyond technological benchmarks and consider the interaction with humans. And we don't know enough about that yet, so we have to get some interaction data, and that involves a minimum amount of observation and control, negatively framed surveillance. And yeah, I don't see a way around that, so I would agree that there's a little tension.
Yeah, and I think that tension is exactly how a multi-stakeholder model works. So that there will always be a tension, of course, looking from the different angles. But I think when Anastasia is talking about personal control, and this is very important, of course, that you have control of what's happening with you when you're in a virtual world, when you are also in Web 4.0, in other things, and so also control over your data. So that is an important one of them when looking from a personal side. Control from a platform point of view, from a government point of view, that's always something else. And there is always, and there is indeed a very big debate on how much control there should be, how much protection of the user there should be, and in view also on what we saw this morning on personal harm and so on. So how can this be incorporated without too much affecting privacy and even anonymity? Anonymity that was in the beginning of the internet, it was even anonymous, and we gave all up. Now we have an identity, and that identity is attached to you, also to your physical identity. So anonymity is already not existing anymore, but what about indeed the rest? And I don't know if I touched on your question.